Good evening, members. Before I say anything else, would the people who I can see on my screen who are the substantive members of the committee just stick up their thumb and nod that you can hear me clearly? Thank you very much indeed. Good evening to members of the committee. Good evening to members of the public who are viewing us live on the stream. Importantly, I can see that we have a number of senior officers joining us tonight, and indeed a number of cabinet members, the leader, and indeed Councillor Mrs. Helen Dyke and Councillor John Thomas. And apologies if I have missed the other two cabinet members, but I can also see a number of other councillors as well. You are all very welcome. I think we're all well versed to conducting Zoom meetings now, but of course, if you would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand, and Louisa will be keeping a note, and she will let me know who wishes to speak next. The meeting scheduled for 2 hours, insofar as we must suspend standing orders if we wish to go any longer than the 2 hours. And excuse me, I'll therefore just formally for the record ask Sian Burford, our committee clerk, if there are any apologies for absence. Sian.
No apologies received.
Thank you very much indeed. It follows therefore to agenda item 2. There are no appointment of substitutes. Agenda item 3. Would any member of the committee, first of all, like to declare any interest? Please do so now. No, no member of the committee wishes to declare any interest. Are there any other members of the council not on the committee who would like to declare an interest? Would you kindly raise your virtual hand, please, and I'll come to you. Louisa, I can't see any virtual hands raised. Is that your position as well?
Yes, we don't have any virtual hands raised.
Thank you very much indeed. In which case, I will move on to the minutes of the 2 meetings. The first was our ordinary meeting on the 5th of March, and the second was on the 23rd of March. In fact, the final meeting of the council to meet face to face before lockdown. Is it your wish that those minutes are approved as a true and accurate record? And if they are, my electronic signature will be added to them. Would somebody like to move approval, please? Councillor Desmond has raised his own physical hand. Would somebody second that, please? Councillor Mear stuck up his thumb next, so it's been moved by Councillor Desmond, seconded by Councillor Mear. Just all raise your physical hand to the camera, please. I think that is unanimous. Are you content with that, Louisa?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. In which case we will move on to agenda item 5, the standing item on the agenda. Just before I do so, of course, I should just say formally, we did cancel our ordinary meeting on the 2nd of April, and that's the only meeting of scrutiny that has been cancelled. And of course, we weren't able to meet virtually because the regulations were not in a position for us to be enabled to do that. And of course, because of the election scheduled in May, there wasn't an ordinary meeting. So this is the first ordinary meeting other than the 2nd of April since our ordinary meeting on the 5th of March. Agenda item 5, how are we doing performance update? I'll invite Rhiannon Foxall to present the report, and then we'll take questions page by page. So over to you, Rhiannon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good evening, members. This report covers Q4, which is the 1st of January to the 31st of March. It's the usual format that we're all quite familiar with now. Appendix 1 is the exception report, which is anything that's off track or cancelled. Appendix 2 is a detailed report of the performance against our purpose of planning. Appendix 3 is a detailed report of performance against our purpose of housing, and Appendix 4 is the capital projects report. Appendix 1 and Appendix 4, which is the exception report and the capital projects report, have been run from the 2020-21 actions, because they're more rolling actions, whereas the Appendix 2 and Appendix 3, which are regarding planning and housing, report the status as it was in the 1920 actions as at the end of Q4. There's only one key achievement or issue highlighted, which is just to alert members that there's been a slight change to figures that we pull in for one of our measures, which explains why there's quite a significant jump in the trend charts. So if there are any questions, then I will happily try to answer them if I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon. Let me just turn to page 12, and obviously we've got 12 to 13 and 14, which is just the normal front of the report. So the first item really is on page 15, the industrial units at Frenco. So first of all, members of the committee, any questions on page 15?
No hands have been raised.
Thank you, Louisa. We'll move to 16. Any questions on page 16?
No hands have been raised.
Thank you. Page 17.
No hands have been raised.
Thank you. Page 18.
No hands have been raised.
Thank you. Page 19.
No hands have been raised.
And 19.
No hands have been raised.
20.
No hands have been raised.
21.
No hands have been raised.
22.
No hands raised.
23.
No hands raised.
24.
No hands raised.
25.
No hands raised.
26.
No hands raised.
27.
No.
28.
No hands raised.
And 29.
No hands raised.
Okay, in which case, no questions on that report. Are members of the committee content that we note that report? Perhaps you'd just like to show your physical hand. Good. Can everybody hear me okay? Good, thank you. Fine. In which case, thank you to you, Rhiannon. And can I invite you, obviously, to leave the meeting should you so wish at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Can I before we move on to the flooding motion? Thank you. Can I just, before we move on to the flooding notice and motion, just say to Aki from IT that I've had a message from Councillor Onslow that she's struggling to get in. So perhaps some contact could be made with Councillor Onslow in the hope that she can join, because obviously she is a member of the committee. Good. So we will move on to agenda item 6, which is the consideration, and indeed Councillor Onslow is now here, consideration of the briefing paper on the flooding report. The Chief Executive is going to speak to the paper for no more than 5 minutes, and I would ask the committee to allow him to do so, and then I'm going to paper and indeed make a proposal for a timeline before we start dealing with the scoping and as to who and when we would like witnesses. So perhaps I can hand over to the Chief Executive, Ian Miller, to speak to the paper.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members of the Overview Scrutiny Committee and other members who are watching, and of course the public who are following online. So this report follows on from the resolution of the Council on the 26th of February, which was moved by Councillor Edgington White and is set out in paragraph 1.2 of the paper. The paper goes on to give a background to the storm and weather events in February that caused flooding and disruption, not just in Wyre Forest, but of course more widely. Before looking at the detail in section 3 of the impact of the storms in Wyre Forest, and you can see in there information about the severe impact that was felt in a number of areas, as set out in particular in the table in paragraph 3.6, which lists the number of residential and business properties that were affected by the flooding. In section 4, we deal with briefly with the response from Wyre Forest District Council, a range of activities both immediately but also in slower time that the council has been responsible for dealing with, including work by North Worcestershire Water Management, which is a joint service hosted by Wyre Forest District Council. And then coming on in section 5 to a very brief summary timeline of the events, and also information obviously in section 6 about which wards were affected. Of course, all of the wards down the Severn Valley. And actually there's an omission there, Chairman, I do apologise for. I should mention Wyre Forest Rural, because of course there was a flood event in Wolverley in your area, wasn't there? Then some information in section 7 about the agencies are involved, as always is the case with flooding and many other significant civil contingency events such as the current COVID-19 pandemic. It's always a multi-agency response, and that's particularly true, as I say, in a flooding event. So the usual agencies, statutory and volunteer, were involved. And then there's some information in that section about the local resilience forum, the various sorts of meetings that were held. And then finally in section 8, and I know this is where you'll want to be spending a bit of time shortly in terms of what are the sort of next steps in terms of timeline for the committee's work, some suggestions about agencies that the committee should be looking to take evidence from, and the sort of areas that could be covered in those sessions, but of course also bearing in mind the impact on public and businesses, and I'm sure the committee will want to hear from some residents and businesses that were flooded or affected, to hear about their experience. So with that very brief introduction, Chairman, I know you're going to deal with timeline first, but then obviously I'm sure you'll also be wanting to give members of the committee the opportunity to ask questions or raise any comments on the paper, and probably for the convenience of the committee when we come to that, it would be better if we took it section by section. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Executive. And colleagues should note that Richard Osborne, who is the Principal Environmental Health Officer and Housing and Water Manager for North Worcestershire Water Management, which is a shared service between the 3 northern districts, has joined us as well, as he's had some involvement and can have some technical input should we need it. What I propose to do, if I may, is just raise the issue of the timeline, because of course we've got the notice of motion. We do have a scheduled scrutiny meeting in July, and of course we have full council scheduled for the 15th of July, and scrutiny is scheduled for the 2nd. And we also already have a number of other really important items to consider on the 2nd of July meeting. The reality is it's likely to be a virtual meeting, and even if we were content to suspend standing orders, I don't think it's effective scrutiny for a 3 or 4 hour meeting. And I think we need to try and allocate some specific time by way of a potential an additional meeting. Now, I have tested something out with the Chief Executive and Louisa by liaison yesterday evening and today to see whether we could slot in an additional meeting of scrutiny, because it strikes me that the principal witness is the Environment Agency. They're the first and foremost, the most important agency. And it would strike me in hearing the evidence and in the flow of the scrutiny of this area, you would hear from the EA, and then we would decide who else we would then want to hear from. and the Environment Agency are in a position to attend if we were to have an additional meeting of scrutiny, effectively a fortnight today at 6 o'clock over Zoom, which is the 25th of June. But I am, and I say it now, the very first person to complain when we do not get good notice of meetings. So I would not wish to proceed on the 25th if we hadn't got virtually every current member of the Scrutiny Committee who is able to attend. So I think I'm just going to pause there and just ask if the Scrutiny Committee members are content and available to slot in an additional meeting to last a couple of hours, specifically to deal with flooding as effectively an extra meeting of scrutiny. So I'll pause there. Happy if anybody wishes to raise their hand and wants to speak, but if you want to speak, raise your blue hand. But in the first instance, could everybody raise their virtual hand if they're okay with a meeting on the 25th? Louisa, I think that's unanimous of the 10 members, isn't it?
It is, yes. It is a unanimous.
Good. Well, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. In which case, I think there's much more likelihood of providing a more cogent and substantive interim report to full council, which we're mandated to do on the 15th, if we've got a specific meeting, additional meeting. So we will be able to have a good meeting on the 25th, and then have, obviously, this as an item on the 2nd of July, where we can line up other witnesses. And indeed, we have a further meeting on the 3rd of September, where we can line up any further witnesses, then to complete a substantive report to full council at the September meeting. Good. So let's tackle the scoping. First of all, just before we do that, are there any members of the committee that would like to just ask a question on the background that's sort of set out on page 30, 31 and 32? Anyone on 30, 31 or 32? Then we'll go to the timeline, then we'll go to the scoping of the witnesses. So I'll pause there and just ask Louisa to see if anybody would like to speak on 30, 31 or 32.
We've got Councillor Edgington White.
Thank you. Good evening, Councillor Edgington White. Please do speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members of the committee and those watching. I did have my hand up right at the beginning. Very happy with the way in which this has been introduced and the things that you have suggested. I do actually want to speak on items 8.2, 8.3 and 8.4, but as I've got my hand up already, I don't have any specific questions on the sections that you've just talked about, but can I say right at the beginning, I'm very appreciative of such a comprehensive report in such a short time scale. I don't disagree with anything that's been brought forward, and as I say, I would like to make a couple of comments, or helpful comments hopefully, on 8.2, 8.3 and 8.4 when we get there, unless other items arise during the discussion. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Edgington White. Then in which case I shall call you first when we get to those items. Louisa, does anybody else have their hand up in respect of 30, 31 or 32?
Councillor Mear.
Councillor Mear.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Again, it's first of all a very general comment. I think reading this, it's fantastic actually to see that we are right on top of it. And although the Chief Executive, I think, did express some concerns about the time that Council had placed at the last Council meeting, this paper just goes to show that there is tremendous work going on. I don't really have any questions. Well, all I was going to ask you was that we've got this meeting on the 25th. Can I just be clear that we are only going to be discussing the flooding with the Environment Agency? That will be the only item on the agenda on that day. I'd like to give it as much time as possible because we probably won't get another opportunity. So that's really just for clarification.
I can answer the first part absolutely unequivocally. Yes, it will be a meeting specifically for flooding. I would anticipate that we will only have the EA there, because I suspect it will be too short notice to get any of the other witnesses. But I will just take guidance from you as a committee that you are content with the only witness being the EA, and we'll come on to that when we do the timeline, when we get to the agencies on page 34. So if there are no other questions, would anybody like to raise a question or comment just on the summary timeline of events, halfway down 33, top of page 34?
No hands have been raised.
Thank you, Louisa. Well, let's get to the meat of the issue then, as set out on 34, 35 and 36. The agencies involved, and indeed businesses and members of the public, and whether we think there are other agencies, Bewdley Town Council, other VCS groups, other flooding forums, etc., and indeed the timeline. And I promised Councillor Khan Edgington-White, because she wanted to speak very much in respect of 8.1 and 8.2. So I'll allow her to go first into bat and make any comments on effectively the order of evidence and the agencies that we ought to be inviting.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, to just say that I'm delighted with the priority that you are giving this via a separate meeting, because the very first comment I would have made on 8.2 is that I would agree with the Chief Executive and people who've authored this report that the Environment Agency is key to us being able to move forward. And I think I've had conversations with them as a member of the Bewdley Flood Events Group and the community flooding, and I know that they are working on things and they are hopeful. We were hoping to get a report last week. Obviously their focus with our group is about feedback from the residents and working with the residents for future developments of the property level resilience, etc. But I know that they have lots to prepare and lots to offer us. And I imagine that their report will be fully completed and in circulation at that level, at residence level, by the 25th. But the fact that they are willing to come along to a meeting and address some of these issues, particularly things like the technical issues, the feasibility, and the funding issues, because I know that they will be able to update us on where they are with the funding. We know they had substantial funding announced earlier in the year, and an update on whether that is still in place and how that's going to be distributed is going to be key to that discussion, as well as moving forward. Now, the other point I wanted to make was Worcestershire County Council. When we get to them, this is 8.3, they are the lead council. And one of the things that I would be hoping that we will talk to them about is condition of the road. The link into Starport Road now has been quite badly damaged. The surface is damaged by the episodes during February. There's a lot of damage to the tarmac as a result of the pressure on the temporary barrier. I'm sure that Worcestershire Highways will have some opinions on how that can be dealt with in the future and the cost implications. There's also erosion of the riverbank in that location, which in longer term, it may mean that there's going to have to be some major reworking of that road before we lose that road access into Bewdley altogether. I am talking about several years, but I am also mindful that eventually that will become a major project in itself. So when we're talking to Worcestershire County Council, I think considerations about the road and the riverbank that supports that road, that highway, will be key as well to that discussion. And the third thing is Severn Trent. So I don't know if they are directly the authority we should be speaking to, But of course, Severn Trent have a lot of responsibility with the drainage, the culverts, all that is compromised during a flood event, as it was in this previous flood event. And I think Severn Trent and their plans for the future and their funding and their management of the pumping, the drainage during the flood event is key to considerations as well moving forward. And finally, 8.4, sorry, there is a local flood group, the Ribbenhall Flood Group, which has been active for many, many years, and obviously we would go to them. But there's also the Bewley Community Flood Group as well. So I think receiving evidence from them and the work that they do will all be key to getting the best solution on this. But can I just reiterate, I'm really, really grateful to you and to the Chief Executive for bringing this forward so that we can be considering all of these things before there are any more flood events in Bewley.
Thank you, Councillor White. Let me just pose you one question that Councillor Meir posed to me. Do you agree that at the 25th meeting we should deal with the EA alone, because we're probably going to be good for a couple of hours with them?
Absolutely, 100%. That is the route that I would have been suggesting.
Thank you very much indeed. Louisa, I think Councillor Susie Griffiths' blue hand was next. Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct.
Councillor Griffiths, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Just echoing what Shazzy said, thank you so much for getting, such a comprehensive report together so quickly. Mine was just in respect of 8.4 as well, and was just wondering if I've missed this sort of the opportunity for businesses or homes to feedback, in which capacity that would take. All I wanted to say was sort of related to 4.4. I'm good friends with Gil, who was flooded, his tea rooms in Wolverley, and Gil, I did pass on my thanks to the officers and those concerned, because he couldn't praise the council highly enough. He said that the grant was through quicker than he could ever imagine, and the help that he'd received and everything from the council had made a really awful time so much easier. So I just wanted to pass on that thanks the same as well. I know with Colin at the station how well supported, and I just wondered if there are businesses who wanted to feedback in any meeting, at sort of what opportunity they may get. Would it be at the overview and scrutiny or would it be full council? I'm a bit confused, sorry.
Councillor Griffiths, we would definitely want to, obviously we cannot, subject to our constitution and standing orders, we cannot of course preclude public participation in the usual way at full council, but I would really want us to hear evidence from residents and businesses affected to appear before the scrutiny committee. I anticipate that being at our September meeting, given I think we're going to deal solely with the EA on the 25th of June, and I suspect we'll have enough statutory partners to be getting on with on the 2nd of July. So I would anticipate, whilst of course regrettably we've got the summer and it's never the best taking evidence over 3 separate meetings, but it is an important piece of work and there will be a record. I anticipate at our 3rd of September meeting we'll be hearing from local residents, local businesses, and the two flood groups that Councillor Carnegie to White has referred to. Hope that answers that question.
Thank you so much, that's perfect, thank you.
Councillor Meir has indicated, Chairman.
He certainly has put his blue hand up. Councillor Meir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much once again. I think what we mustn't do is only when we're asking for witnesses is target the ones who are directly affected by flooding, because as you may recall, the whole of Bewley was closed, and there were a number of, all the businesses would have been affected. So whatever we do, wherever the flooding actually occurred, we've got to remember that there will be the people who were immediately affected, so who actually had water in their properties, but also the businesses and those people who were in the wider community who were also affected. So we need to reach out as much as we can. It's just to make the point that, let's not just focus on those that we've got listed here, but also the wider communities in those areas.
Good point, thank you, Councillor Meir. Louisa, would you like to tell me whose blue hand is next?
We have no other blue hands.
Okay, well, shall I try and summarise, because we are going to need to give the Chief Exec and Louisa a steer in terms of who we want. So I think, and I will just get the members of the committee just to raise your physical hand at the camera, that we're all happy and content that our meeting on the 25th of June will be solely to deal with the evidence of the Environment Agency. That's all 10 hands, unless an officer wishes to tell me any different. That's really helpful, thank you. Then we move to our meeting in July, on the 2nd of July. Personally, I feel that we certainly want to invite Worcestershire County Council as the statutory highway authority, who obviously have statutory duties as well in respect of flooding, to be at that meeting. We have a number of other issues on that meeting, but I do want to deal with flooding for at least an hour and a half of that meeting. So I would like to think that in addition to the County Council, we would at least be able to get 2 other partners to be able to give evidence. Councillor Edgington-White referred to Severn Trent, and of course what springs to mind to me is also the Canal and Rivers Trust, which isn't on the list in 7.1. So I certainly think as a starter for 10 we ought to ask for the County Council. I wonder whether SARA and the West Midlands Ambulance Service would be who else we would invite to that type of meeting. We do just need to give far away, and we do need to give the Chief and Louisa a steer to get people wicket rolled to be able to come, and if they can't come, to bring somebody else forward. So I'm sort of making it's not a proposal but a suggestion to try and be helpful, that we have the County Council, SARA and West Midlands Ambulance Service. Now, we know how busy the ambulance service is with coronavirus. I don't minimise that, hence why we haven't tackled this hitherto. But one would like to think that at least in another 3 weeks, matters nationally and locally will have abated just a little bit more. So what do colleagues feel about those suggestions that I've made? I'll turn to Louisa, and she can see if there are any blue hands who want to agree or disagree with me. Otherwise, I might just get a physical show of hands. Louisa, I'll pause there.
We've got Councillor Edgington-White and Councillor Rayner that are both indicated. Thank you. Councillor Edgington-White first, and then Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, definitely Worcestershire County Council, Severn Trent. Now, as for SARA and the ambulance, I would take advice from the Chief Executive as to who he feels, when we were dealing with gold level and we were dealing with local issues, as to who was most directly involved, because I feel there was a big police involvement about road barriers. There was a lot of police presence on the bridge and on Ribsford. So I don't know whether there is a route there where perhaps they are more, I mean, whether the Ambulance Trust were directly involved, but it seemed to me that the police had an enormous presence during the whole managing of the event. So that's just a comment.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Edgington-White. Before I bring the Chief Exec in, let's just hear from Councillor Rayner, and then I'll bring the Chief Executive in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add, what about Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue? Because surely they would have actually had some input during these dreadful events that have happened. And I just thought that they might also be useful to have earlier on in our investigations.
Absolutely, yes. I was just making some initial suggestions. They're on the list in 7.1, and I don't doubt for a moment, given their involvement, we would want to hear from them. Of course, I guess it's just when we want to hear from people. So, Chief, I'll just bring you in next to see if you've got any comments on the order of events.
Thank you, Chairman. I see Councillor Shepherd, I think, is indicating he may wish to speak in a moment. I'd agree with what Councillor Edgington-White said, which is that whilst I know the ambulance service and also the Severn Area Rescue Association did deploy and did provide some assistance, so I don't think their involvement was as heavy as Councillor Rayner has just been suggesting that we saw from the police and the fire and rescue service. So I think if the meeting on the 2nd of July was to try to cover the County Council, Severn Trent Water, and I certainly agree that there are issues there in terms of how the storm drainage works and so on and so forth, and some of the pumping that was meant to operate, together with the police and fire and rescue service. That gives you a very full set of people to be talking to on the 2nd of July. And depending on what you hear from that, that might indicate that you needed to take further evidence from some other agencies involved. But I think that with the Environment Agency and that group of 4, that would give you more than enough to be getting on with.
Thank you very much indeed, Chief. Sorry, I muted and then I'm muting myself. I'm now off mute. Yes, Worcestershire County Council, the police, Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Authority, and Severn Trent for the July meeting. I'll put that to the committee in just a moment, but I can see Councillor Dixon Shepherd's physical hand is raised. So Councillor Shepherd, I'm happy to call you to speak now.
Surely the Canals and River Trust is an important witness, because it's their water that's come down from Wales, and surely is it beyond them to do some mitigation further up the river to prevent the amount of water coming down to our area?
Thank you, Councillor Shepherd, and certainly, obviously I suggested them, and I certainly think we can hear from them to try and bring this discussion, really helpful discussion, to some form of conclusion for everyone tonight and everyone listening over live link. I think we've really got a firm proposal that we have the EA at our special meeting on the 25th, and then at our ordinary meeting, we devote certainly an hour and a half of our 2nd of July meeting, and we hear from the 4 statutory agencies that the Chief Executive listed, the County Council, Police, Hereford and Worcester Fire and Rescue Authority, and Severn Trent. And then at that meeting, we can then formulate as a committee who we want to invite to at the September meeting, and indeed decide whether we would need a further additional extra meeting in September before full council. So that's my proposal and steer based on the comments that I've received. EA on the 25th, County Police, Fire and Severn Trent on the 2nd, and then take it from there. Perhaps by way of a show of, I'll just check with Louisa. Has anybody else raised their blue hand? I can't see anybody, Louisa, but just tell me if I've missed anyone.
No, nobody's raised a blue hand.
Thank you very much. Would the 10 members of the committee like to physically show their hand if they're in agreement with what I've suggested? Louisa Sean, I think that's pretty unanimous from the committee.
Yes, unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, members. And thank you to Richard Osborne, who did join us. Richard, the committee won't be offended if you wish to zoom out of the meeting, and indeed I won't be offended if any members wish to zoom out who specifically just came in to deal with the flooding matter. And can I just place on record my thanks to the Chief Executive for writing the report. I know he did receive contributions from others, but with all of the other work going on and further to the comments that we made at last full council meeting, nevertheless, the Chief has managed to pull that together. So that helpfully concludes agenda item 6. And we'll move on to the additional item, which I did use Chairman's prerogative to place on the agenda, which was just for the Scrutiny Committee to consider changes to the way payment can be taken due to the coronavirus pandemic. everyone had electronically the report for agenda item 7 on Tuesday of this week, and indeed mine arrived in the post yesterday. The Chief Executive is the Service Director responsible for this area now, as a result of obviously Linda Draycott leaving the organisation, and the Chief joins us, as everyone is aware. So let me hand over first of all to the Chief Executive to just present the paper, and then happy to take questions from any members. And I am grateful to Councillor John Thomas, the Cabinet Member with responsibility, for joining us this evening, and I will give him the opportunity to speak or answer any questions as well. But I'll hand over to the Chief first of all. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chairman. Yes, 2 for the price of 1 tonight. Hopefully it's a self-explanatory report and gives you all the information that you need as members of the committee to understand the background to what happened and what was announced, and some of the other relevant issues. So I wasn't proposing to say anything by way of introduction, because hopefully members have had a chance to read the briefing paper, and obviously happy to try to deal with any questions that might arise.
Thank you. Louisa, do we have any blue hands up?
We don't have any blue hands up, Chair.
Oh, we've got Councillor Desmond's physical hand, and then Councillor Onslow's. Try and use your blue hands. I've got Councillor Desmond first then.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. You're now on mute though, Councillor Desmond. Having said, can you hear you us okay? You've muted yourself.
Well, can you hear me now?
That's it. Yes, perfect, yes.
Right. Good evening, Chairman, and good evening, everybody. Obviously, I'm very grateful for the Chief's report. Absolutely, it is self-explanatory. I do have a question, please, which I will come to in a moment. I would like to start off with a caveat, if I may, Chairman, and start off by saying that I'm certainly not questioning the integrity of officers and the Cabinet on the original decision that was taken. I believe that was taken in the spirit of public health, and I believe it was taken for the right reasons. So, you know, I'm certainly not having a go in terms of the integrity. Obviously, we had I believe, a press release by the council, which was on the 22nd of May, setting out that obviously payment would resume on the 1st of June, albeit with no cash. We then had the press release then on the 1st of June to say that there would be a U-turn by the Progressive Alliance, and cash would then be taken from our payment machines from the 8th. I would say that obviously on social media there was a incredible amount of anger and frustration on the original council's decision to cease cash payment. I think it's fair to say that had we still had card payment by the council, card payment and Just Park, I think those two elements would have been fine. Obviously, we, as a previous administration, did away with card payment on the basis that the arrangement and the license came to an end, and I think off the top of my head it saved us in the region of £35,000. So we had Just Park app, and we had obviously cash payment, which the bulk of payment by machine is in cash. My question is on the process, Chairman, please. How did we get to a stage, and my question is directed, if I may, to the relevant cabinet member, how did we get to a stage where we only had payment by Just Park? Because obviously it can be argued that this is or was discriminatory against a certain section of our community, those who don't have a smartphone or could pay by phone through the Just Park app. So my question is, was there full and frank discussion with the relevant cabinet member and the cabinet on this with officers, or was it a question that the cabinet and the cabinet member was simply notified of the decision by officers? Because on social media, a member of the Progressive Alliance stated very, very clearly that they were unhappy at the original decision, and they were going to campaign for the change of obviously the decision, and therefore one can deduce from that there was no debate or consultation within the Progressive Alliance. So I would be very interested, although we've come to the right decision, Chairman, I'd be very interested in the catalogue of events and the trail which led to the original decision, please. And I'd be grateful if the cabinet member could answer that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Desmond. A very long question. And just to correct you on one minor point, when you indicated that the revised decision was announced, it was announced on the 4th of June in a press release, not the 1st. The original press release was on the 22nd of May for the changes to come in on the 1st, and then on the 4th of June, the revised press release in respect of the changes to come in on the 8th. I think it's fair to say that that's more of a political question. It's not really for, it wouldn't be fair for an officer to comment on political matters. So I've got Councillor Chambers in a moment. I think Councillor Onslow indicated, but Councillor Thomas, I want to give you the opportunity. I don't want to ambush you, but you are the cabinet member. It's a political question. You've put your video on. That's really kind. Happy for you to answer Councillor Desmond's question.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. I'm sorry, I came in halfway through Councillor Desmond's question. I've had a problem with my computer and I've had to go out again and reboot it. So I'm afraid, Councillor Desmond, I didn't catch all your question.
Well, he's not going to repeat it, Councillor Thomas. Let me praise it. He's grateful for the revised decision, but how was the decision made? Who made the decision, by who for the original decision, and who made the amended decision?
The original decision to suspend payments by cash was taken with information provided by officers, and also the following government guidelines with regard to keeping people safe. With regard to the coronavirus, we know that the virus is spread by droplets which are transmitted when you cough or sneeze or whatever, and this can go and this is transmitted through touching of machines or parts with your hands. So originally we were looking to keep this people as safe as we could by hoping to by suspending payments by cash, because it can be said that the virus could be transmitted by paper or coins or other means, and so we look to follow the guidelines and try and keep people safe, including many of our own staff who have to deal with the situation daily. And then as government advice and people, the advice that more shops were able to open and people were able to move more freely around. we realized that we needed to bring back in the facility to use cash, and we also bought in plenty of signage, and we made sure that all people using the machines were informed about the social distancing and making sure that the cleansing, they gelled their hands or wore gloves, whatever. And all our staff then were provided with PPE to make sure that the whole of the situation it was well contained.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I might have a couple of questions in due course, but I don't want to hog it as chairman. I want to give everyone else the opportunity. Louisa, I can see Councillor Chambers' blue hand is up. Was she?
Yes, we've got Councillor Chambers next.
Thank you. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. My question was in and around the timing of the situation, in terms of I understand that the loss of revenue to the council by not having parking paid for. However, at this point whereby we still have the corona pandemic going on, so there is the spread of the virus issue that you have by people touching the machine, etc. But secondly, obviously people have been relying heavily on the larger retailers who are able to deliver, such as Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, etc., from the town centre. And those who have had to go to those establishments have had the joy of free parking because they don't charge in their car parks. However, at this point, when we put the parking charges back in place, some of our shops are now going to reopen and we're not really supporting our town centres. So my question was about the timing, really.
Councillor Thomas, would you just like to pick up the timing point?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, a good question. When was going to be the right time? Should we in fact have made the decision to suspend charges in the first place, as some of the authorities around us have not done? In retrospect, these are some of the things we must look at. There was never going to be a good time to reintroduce the charges. There were many dates talked about, some a lot earlier than the decision we took, and some a lot later. So we had to come to a decision as and when to reintroduce the charges, and we did feel that as things were starting to ease around the time at the beginning of June, that then was the ideal time to reintroduce the charges. We also have to consider the council's point of view. We have lost a considerable amount of revenue from this. I realise that we're not going to recover that revenue, and we're not going to pull back from that for a long time. So we had to come to a decision as to when, and it was agreed that we would do it on the 1st of June.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. I can see Councillor Onslow's blue hand. Is she next?
If you wouldn't mind, Chair, that would be great. Obviously, from all our perspectives, it's never good when the council says one thing and then reverts the decision and says something else, because obviously the public need to have confidence, you know, that what comes out is what's going to happen. So I just wanted to check, and I perhaps lost it because I know the sound isn't always great. But this was a decision of the whole group then to agree not to take cash payments. That was the first thing. And the second thing was that in paragraph 9 on page 4, it says that any temporary action, etc., by definition, was the right thing to do, even if it risked causing inconvenience or potential unfairness. So I'm just wondering how the health advice changed in that time, because I'm not aware that it's changed now.
Thank you. So I think, Councillor Thomas, if I see Councillor Onslow's question, who made the decision in respect to the announcement on the 22nd of May that we, as an authority, would not be taking cash from the pay and display machines? Councillor Onslow said, was that a group decision? But was it your decision as cabinet member? Was it the leaders? Was it a cabinet decision? Who made the original decision, I think, is the question.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the decision to not take payment was taken in consultation with myself and the rest of the cabinet. We had a thorough discussion about this. We thought we acted on advice from officers that at the time that this was the correct thing to do, and that's the way we proceeded.
I think that's really fair and helpful, Councillor Thomas, and do correct me if I get this wrong. So you received professional officer advice, no quarrel with that. When I was leader, I received professional officer advice all the time, and I selected or rejected it as I thought appropriate. But the 5 cabinet members were all happy that cash should not be taken. And then the second question that Councillor Onslow was asked about paragraph 9, and this was really going to be my question, so I'll just really sort of summarise and put it again. The original announcement was made on the 22nd, and then the revised announcement was made on the 4th. Now, we're all alive to the health risks. Stand 2 metres apart, wash your hands, use sanitizer, ensure that our staff, because the health and safety of our workforce is really important, that they're given the right PPE, gloves, masks, so that they're handling cash, but there's no risk to them. When did the advice change from the 22nd of May to the 4th of May? That was Councillor Onslow's question, and that was my question. And as a supplementary, who made the decision then for the 4th of May to start taking cash?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it was again going on advice that we were put forward to by officers. The situation was an ever-changing picture, and again it was discussed in full by all members of the cabinet, and then we decided to carry forward and take the cash from there on, from the 8th of June.
But you would agree the health advice to stand 2 metres apart, wash your hands, use hand sanitizer has always been the advice, and of course shops have been taking cash throughout this period, and perhaps better advice might have been, if you can pay contactlessly, please do so, and only use cash as a last resort. Do you think that might have been a better way of dealing with it on reflection?
Yes, but not all shops, Chairman, with due respect, are taking cash. I know 1 or 2 which I have been into lately are only taking card payments. They're not touching cash at all. And we have more shops opening next week, as you well know. How many of those will be taking cash? I don't know. That's something we'll have to wait and see. So, it's an ever-changing picture, and we can only go on advice that is given to us.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Louisa, I can see Councillor Mears' hand up. Is Councillor Mear next?
Councillor Tracy Onslow is first, and then we've got Councillor Mear.
Yeah, I could see both hands. Okay, Councillor Onslow, another quick bite at the cherry, and then Councillor Mears next.
Very, very quick supplementary. It was just around the group position, really, because did you have representations from members of your group, Councillor Thomas, that they weren't happy with the not taking of cash?
Thank you, Councillor Onslow. There was representations from members of the public, members of the group, and even members of the Conservative Party were represented in what we took heed of.
Thank you. So I think that was a yes. Councillor Mear, would you like to make your point or put your question to the cabinet member?
Yeah, well, I don't think I've got a question. There might be a question. I mean, obviously, Councillor Hart, you'd make a very good lawyer. But of course, we're not in a courtroom at the moment. And these questions seem to me to be a little bit sort of political. What I found...
We are politicians, Councillor Mear, and this is scrutiny of the executive. So
yeah, okay, good. Okay, I'll take that. What happened on Facebook were discriminated against and all sorts of things. And, you know, a few years ago, we campaigned to not have the hub moved from the town hall. And one of the arguments that we use, and you know, the administration at the time told us, was that, and I can see Nathan laughing, was that people will have difficulties in accessing online services. Yet here we were, you know, having the previous administration tell us that that was nonsense. You know, the current Conservatives, and it was a handful of Conservatives actually who were moaning on Facebook about this. What we are in unprecedented times, and we had a council meeting where we decided, or we had a motion where it was decided that political parties and all of that would be set aside. This was a decision that was taken, in my view, to recognise actually that we are starting to lose money. But also, paragraph 9 of this report is that we needed to safeguard the people that were using the car parks. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see a problem with a progressive council taking and reversing decisions, if that's what it was. But my understanding is that they have followed the guidance of the national guidance, and that's where it should rest. There can be no doubt that this council has worked hard. We're very lucky in Wyford when it comes to this pandemic, I think, if you look at other areas, and we need to support businesses as much as possible, but we have to do it systematically, and I think that's what's happening at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for the compliment about being a lawyer, Councillor Mear. You two make a great lawyer as well. Right, I was going to say there are no blue hands left. Louisa, I can see Councillor Helen Dyke's hand raised as cabinet member. Are there just? I've just got one final question to Councillor Thomas Stroke, the Chief, just on a technical point, which I can put in a moment. Louisa, are there any blue hands up from the committee?
No. Oh, no, there's not.
Okay, in which case we'll go Councillor Helen Dyke first, and then I can see the leader of the council has his blue hand up. So we go Councillor Dyke, then Councillor Ballinger. Good evening and welcome, Councillor Helen Dyke.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just a few words, really. I'm 63, a couple of underlying health problems, and I'm very, very worried about the coronavirus and the spread and the problems and what people are suffering. I think that we as a council have to take every precaution to keep the residents of Wyre Forest as safe as possible as within our remit. I am not used to being told what to do by officers, as I think most councillors will know. I take their advice, but I make my own decisions. Yes, we did receive an awful lot of upset comments on Facebook from colleagues as well as members of the public. But I still feel that it is our role to try and do our best for the residents we represent. And we made that choice, we made that decision. Please don't try and say that officers told me what to do, because I can assure you they didn't. I make my decisions on what I think is best for the people I represent. And on another note, we did also receive some comments on Facebook from people who thought we were taking the right decision, who said that although many people were very conscientious about washing their hands and taking all the precautions, there were an awful lot of people out there who weren't. So I'd like to reassure Councillor Desmond, I make my own decisions. I don't do what officers tell me. And I believe in the decision we made because it's our role to do the best for our residents of Wyre Forest.
Councillor Dyke, thank you very much for that honest answer, indicating the political involvement. That's really honest and fair and cogent of you. And I think no one who's an elected member of our council would quarrel regarding the health implications of coronavirus and the health implications of all of our residents. I think we would 100% all agree in respect of those really cogent issues. Councillor Ballinger, very good evening, very warm welcome.
My picture has disappeared. It says it's been disabled by the host. Okay. Ah, there we go. Sorry, it appeared to have been disabled, but it's okay now. Sorry about that, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think this whole issue seems to have sort of blown up from nowhere. It started on that evil called social media, and various people and politicians as well from all sides dabbled in that, and I think that is fatal. We already had a lesson about that when you raised a motion and then withdrew it at the last full council, when you explained about the need for us all as political parties to work together at this time of national crisis. That motivation didn't last long, did it? Because this issue now is really something that should not have come up in this way. You could have asked any of these questions of us. We would have told you at the time. We made the most appropriate decision at the time, based, as your leader keeps telling us, on the best scientific advice available. Now, that scientific advice has changed daily throughout this crisis, absolutely daily. And on occasions, it's changed in the same day from what the government were advising. So we've been second guessing what the government are going to say all the time about crucial services, like car parking, like when the toilets are open, stuff like that. And we've done the best job possible. And our officer team have been brilliant. Our cabinet have been united. And anybody suggesting that one or two of our members might have been critical of that online, I'm not surprised. We don't have a 3-line whip on what our members say on social media. I wish we did. I wish none of them bothered with it, because it seems to cause more hassle than it's worth. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's life. We've got on with it. We've dealt with it. There are much bigger things happening in this world at the moment that we all need to focus our attention on. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. I was taught how to scrutinise the executive by a past master who now currently holds the position that I used to hold. So you taught me very well, Councillor Ballinger. I can see no other blue hands up. Louisa, is that correct?
That's correct.
I just have one technical question, and it's not a trick question. And Councillor Thomas indicated, and look, I'd be the first to admit, previously in my role as leader, car parking income, as much as car parking charges are emotive, you know, in terms of our net revenue budget, there are a necessary evil. So I don't make a huge political point about that. Are we absolutely confident, and perhaps I'll put, this is probably a technical question for the Chief, are we confident that in terms of the flooding episodes in February, and where we had to close some of our car parks and lost income as a result of the flooding, and also when we closed because of the coronavirus, are we confident that we will not be able to claim any of that lost revenue, or will we surely not be able to source down some of the additional money that we've got from government to compensate loss of revenue from flooding and loss of revenue from coronavirus? Perhaps the Chief, do you just want to help me with that? Sorry, I could have asked you in the pre-meet, but it didn't cross my mind.
That's fine, I can assist, Chairman. In respect of the flooding, I think it's true to say that we obviously lost some revenue at Dog Lane car park, because quite a large part of it was taken up with the Environment Agency compound for several weeks, and also temporarily I suspect Gardener's Meadow was not very popular with residents because on the day that it flooded, a number of cars I know were affected at that time, and that may have affected people's willingness to use it again for a period, even though once the barriers were fully erected, in fact, it was perfectly safe to do so, and I did so myself on a number of occasions. But of course, just for the committee's benefit, we did also, both in Stourport and Bewdley, use some of the flooding grant money that we had from the government to fund free weekends of car parking in both those towns. But of course, that unfortunately coincided with the initial phases of coronavirus. It was a couple of weekends in March, so whether as many people took advantage of that as might have been hoped, I rather doubt. In terms of what's happened since then, of course, car parking income is only one of many income streams that's been severely impacted or has disappeared altogether for a period. Obviously, in the case of car parking, it was a choice that was made, partly in order to deliver the free parking for on-duty NHS and social care staff, which was announced in the latter part of March, but also a reflection of the reality that when the lockdown came in on the 23rd of March, in fact, there were very few people who would be using any of our car parks from that point onwards until such time as the lockdown started to shift. But clearly the government has given us significant sums of money. It's not enough. I think the evidence that's been produced from the most recent returns shows that district councils as a collective have been underfunded by the government to the tune of about £200 million up to the end of May in respect of both extra costs that they've incurred and income that they've lost. It remains to be seen precisely where we fall on that spectrum, but I'd be surprised if the government funding that we've had to date covers all of our costs and lost income. And therefore, whilst in the short term we can cope, if the government doesn't come up with some further funding to address the needs not just of district councils but of all councils, one can foresee that there are going to be some significant difficulties.
Chief Executive, that's really helpful and comprehensive answer. So just let me, one quick supplementary for the benefit of certainly myself and hopefully the committee, just to clarify. Are we saying, for example, from the period of 23rd of March until 1st of June, that we would or would not be allocate some of the portion of funding from central government to our lost revenue? Because we could look back over what our income would have been for that period last year and the year before and the year before and get an average. So for budgeting purposes, would we allocate some of that funding? Is that the plan or not?
Yes, that's definitely what's going to happen. And I say not just in car parking, but in things like trade waste and a range of other income streams that have either disappeared altogether or been severely impacted. We will use the government grant to plug the budget, because the budget assumed a certain level of income from various activities, and clearly if we haven't achieved it, we'll be charging that to the grant that we've received.
Chief Executive, that's a really helpful clarification. Thank you, crystal clear. I don't have any other questions. There are no other blue hands raised. That's correct, isn't it, Louisa?
That's correct.
Yeah. In which case, it would be my proposal that, as chairman, that we note the report and endorse the decision that was announced in the 4th of June press release that we've been discussing. Are members happy with that? Thank you. Louisa, I think that was everybody's physical hand, was it? Please tell me if I'm wrong.
Just confirmation from Councillor Shepherd, please. Yep, that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the Chief Executive for assisting with that paper and speaking to it. So, members, with there being no other business, the time is sorry, let me just forgive me before I say that, because there is one other item of business, the work programme on page 8, on page 37. Is everyone just happy that we note that work programme? Excellent, thank you. And in terms of the press involvement at agenda item 9, I think we would want to try and engage the press moving forward, particularly on the scrutiny issue around flooding, and you never know that might be something that interests the press. So I think we'll flag that up with our media team if that's okay, Louisa, and perhaps you could liaise with them. And sorry, with that then, at agenda item 10, there's no other business for the open. There isn't in the exempt, and therefore we don't need to exclude the press and public. And therefore at 7:15, there is no other business. Can I thank all of the members of the committee for your participation and good humour? Can I particularly thank Councillor Thomas for you assisting members with answers to their questions, which was entirely appropriate for you to do so, and I'm grateful. Thank you to the other cabinet members for their contributions, and for everyone else who is a councillor for zooming in, and to all of our officers for their assistance, and importantly to all of the members of the public and indeed officers who may have been watching live on YouTube. And finally, I look forward to seeing everybody at our special meeting on the 25th of June, when we will spend a good 2 hours taking evidence from the Environment Agency. And there will be a paper that will be circulated in advance of scrutiny. I think the agenda will need to go out by about the 17th of the month, and therefore there might be a briefing note from the EA on some of the issues to follow, but we'll certainly have it for the meeting to assist us in our questioning and thoughts for the EA. So with that, thank you all very much indeed for your attendance, and I will formally invite the officers to close down the meeting.